What's up, Thrashers, and welcome back once again to the Thrash Maniac 99 YouTube channel, and I am back with yet another album review, and today I am talking about the latest offering from Flotsam and Jetsam. I am the weapon. You're damn right I am. But anyways, this comes out on September 13th on AFM Records, and well, these guys have been around since the early 80s under a few different names, and of course, Flotsam and Jetsam. So yeah, these guys, legends out of Arizona, one of the early Arizona thrash bands, along with bands like Sacred Reich and Atrophy. But of course, most people should know this was where Jason Newsted came from before he went to Metallica. So I forget how many albums we're up to now. I want to say this is like album number 12 or 13, somewhere around that range. But yeah, I did review their 2019 effort. I forgot about their last album that came out in 2021, but here we are with a new offering, and well, let's check it out and see what we think. So before we get into it, this album was mixed and mastered by one Jacob Hansen. Man, Jacob Hansen's a busy dude this year. Like, he's done so much. So immediately right off the bat with the production on this album, it sounds fantastic. Like, it sounds huge, but it's still very organic sounding. Of course, Jacob Hansen knows how to get the best sounds out of a lot of bands. But as far as like how I would describe this album musically, like, it's still very much thrash it up. Let's just go thrash to the bone and don't apologize for it. That's pretty much the feeling on the majority of songs of this album. But you get a few wrinkles into the thread. Like the opening track, A New Kind of Hero, starts off with this like clean melody, but then it also kind of builds up almost like a power metal song. But some killer drums. Like, I gotta say, the drum work on this album is beyond flying on here when it comes to a thrash album. And then when it gets into thrash territory on this track, feels a lot like 80s Metallica. Particularly on this track, I would say Ride the Lightning would be a good comparison point. And then you get into tracks like Primal. I would say tracks like Primal, Burn My Bridges. Those two songs have a darker tone when it comes to guitars. Like, they tune them down to E flat, which immediately gives it a more darker approach. But both of these songs kind of have a little more of a classic heavy metal vibe, especially in Primal, where it feels a lot like a darker Judas Priest song, whereas Burn My Bridges, it almost feels like Judas Priest meets Testament, almost like Modern Testament meets Judas Priest. But on Burn My Bridges, you get some like atonal melodies and even a harmonized lead, which I gotta say, the lead work on this album, it's just pretty much for the most part nothing but shred-tastic shit. Because, man, these guitarists, whoever these guitarists are in this band, I couldn't remember them off the top of my head, but they know how to shred on that fretboard. And their alternate picking and tremolo picking on some of these leads is just mwah, wonderful. Then you get into The Head of the Snake. This one arguably was probably the heaviest song of the album because the guitars get tuned down. It sounded like they were tuned down to B, which actually, not only in the tone, but even in the songwriting, almost felt a little bit like a melodic death metal song, despite the vocals being more thrash forward than melodic death metal forward, as, man, it does chug along pretty well, but there's some groove. Like, there's little drum grooves that pop up, pop up on this track. And then drum grooves even come back later on in the song Cold Steel Lights, more of those, like, tasteful drum grooves. Even Running Through the Fire, tribal grooves. So yeah, groove does come in here and there on this album, but for the most part, it's more about the speed. Now, you get into a track like Beneath the Shadows, which I thought was probably one of the big ones that kind of stood out like a sore thumb. As tasty guitar licks in the beginning, it's a very catchy song. However, it does sound like a more thrashed version of ZZ Top LaGrange. Like, the riffs, the bluesy swings, feels almost exactly like ZZ Top's LaGrange, which I always like hearing like thrash bands taking some old hard rock ideas and putting it into modern thrash. I mean, Testament did that with Dream Deceiver off of Titans of Creation, where they did Scorpion, She's a Woman, She's a Man, or He's a Woman, She's a Man, I should say. So it's kind of interesting how some thrash bands like to squeeze in some hard rock riffs or moments. Gates of Hell, I would say, yeah, Gates of Hell, Kings of the Underworld, and Running Through the Fire, all very much centered around let's just, again, get thrash and furious with this. Gates of Hell almost reminds me closer of like modern Creator, like it's a little more epic sounding, a little more triumphant, but some shred trade-offs and even some harmony comes in. Cold Steel Lights. This one kind of goes for more of a speed metal vibe. Like it's more DB, punky driven. Again, there's some groove, even a tasty, clean melody. And then Kings of the Underworld kind of feels a little closer to like Exodus a little bit when it comes down to these riffs and the songwriting approach. Running Through the Fire feels kind of like Metallica a little bit. I would say closer to Master of Puppets era Metallica, but again, another clean melody and that tribal groove. And then the closing track, which is the longest on the album at a little over 5 minutes, Black Wings. Awesome drum intro that kind of made me harken back to Neil Peart from Rush a little bit. And it's mostly like this big galloping song. Like it just gallops along pretty well. There's some dark melodies that show up. And even a big vocal note from Eric a.k.a., who's been in the band from the beginning. And he's still wailing on them vocals. So as far as any complaints go, I would say I only have one big problem I had with this album, and that was the song Cold Steel Lights. First, after the clean melody is done, the song just abruptly transitions to the guitar solo, which I thought was just way too sharp, way too abrupt. It felt like they could have just let it fade into the shredding solo or do like a drum fill to transition, but no, it was just like start, it was like stop, start. And it just kind of took me out of that song a little bit. And then the song itself just ends abruptly, like with no rhyme or reason whatsoever. I feel like if they would have ended the song on a better note and not done that abrupt transition, that song would have landed a little bit better for me, because up to that moment, it was a killer track, like speed metal D beats and drum grooves, the whole 9 yards. But other than that, I still think this was a great album, one of the better traditional thrash albums of the year. I'm going to give this 4 out of 5. I thought this was a great offering, and Flotsam and Jetsam's more modern run since 2016, they just continue pumping out consistent release. Nothing more, nothing less. But of course, those are just my opinions. What did you guys think? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like, comment, share, subscribe, all that fun stuff. Thank you for watching. Keep your horns high and your dreams wet.
Thank you for your patronage.